listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE, broadcasting to you from Southern California. And we have a lot to talk about on today's program. I want to talk about predictive programming. Now, predictive programming is a word that's been used for a long time. Many people don't know what the word predictive programming really means. And whether you do know what it means or you're not certain what it means or whatever, on today's program, we're going to expose the reality of a psychological technique called predictive programming. Now, why this is essential for you to understand is because, first of all, you're an individual created in God's image. And that individuality and the fact that you're created in God's image is under an all-pervasive systematic attack that is highly scientific and occultic at the same time. In addition to that, you are either a parent or were a parent or a grandparent or just a person that may have influence or interactions with all kinds of people. Now, predictive programming actually came from science fiction. And as most of you know, I was a big reader of science fiction novels when I was a kid, a little kid all the way through, many years of my life. Being a avid science fiction novel reader, that gives you an advantage. It gives you an upper hand over most people in understanding what's happening in our world today, because by reading science fiction novels, you exposed your mind to complex futuristic scientific technologies and scientific problems and all kinds of things that the average person wouldn't have any idea what you're talking about unless they were introduced to it through science fiction novels or science fiction movies. That's the main thing. And so many of the people in the world today who are, inventors, big tech giants, movers and shakers in all kinds of industries, the common thread they all seem to have, because they talk about it publicly in interviews, a case in point would be Elon Musk, the head of SpaceX and the whole SpaceX rockets. Also, Elon Musk and his Tesla self-driving car, a super entrepreneur. But he says quite openly that he couldn't have done what he's been able to do unless he was a big fan of science fiction novels when he was a kid. And he said something very interesting in this interview. He said, while a lot of my friends were out playing or whatever, he said, I was at home reading science fiction novels. I couldn't put him down. And you see, that time that he had to be alone with himself and alone with a science fiction novel allowed his brain, his consciousness, to expand and grow by creating billions of new neurological pathways and by creating neuroplasticity, which is like the overall flexibility of the brain so your brain can expand and grow. And that alone time he had where he read science fiction novels, for hours at a time like I did, that was conducive, to put it bluntly, it was conducive to growing his brain. It was conducive to making him smarter. It was conducive to making him more creative and conducive to making him more intelligent. Now, why I'm bringing this up is for two reasons. Today's child, because we live in a world where there's the dominance of social media platforms, and that could be video platforms or social media platforms. I mean, it's everywhere. It could be video games, your laptop, your cell phone, virtual reality, whatever it is. Young people are so immersed in this virtual reality world that consists of the internet, social media, and all these technologies. But the downside to that is that when you're totally immersed in electronic, social media type technologies, what that does is neurologically, it shuts off the capacity of your brain to grow, to become more intelligent, to become more creative, to expand your mind. Now, you may not like this or you may like it. It doesn't matter. It's the truth. And if you're a parent, you need to really hone in on this, because this is important. This is something that parents have never had to face in the history of human civilization. My wife and I had to face it. Our kids are adults now. But I'll tell you, we were probably the first generation. My wife and myself were among the first generation of parents. And that means millions and millions of parents, probably many of you. You were among the first generation of parents that had to deal with parenting versus social media technology, the internet, so on and so forth. Because when you were parenting and I was parenting, our kids were in those age categories. You know, our kids lived through, I forgot, when they were really young, we had computers that were plugged into the telephone jack. You know, you'd unplug the telephone and then you'd plug the wire from the telephone into your internet. And it was a nightmare. It was a bloody nightmare because it was so slow that it almost wasn't worth trying to do anything, because it was like slow beyond belief. You remember those days. And so that actually was a good thing, because it put some limits. Like, even a kid, no matter how much the kid was into the internet or whatever, there was only so much you could take of the slowness of the internet. And then finally, the technological revolution occurred that the internet went Wi-Fi or wireless, and all of a sudden, overnight, you were able to navigate around the internet at far, far faster speeds. And you could actually do things on the internet now that you could go with faster speeds. So the point is that you and I were part of that revolution. Our kids were part of that technological revolution. But you found out early on, after Wi-Fi came into being, and you know, everything was accelerating then like everything is accelerating now. So what wasn't a potential problem one year, by the time the year was over, was a major problem. And there were two major problems initially with the internet and parenting and social media. The problems were that any kid who talked to his friends or her friends, any kid could access relatively easily the most hardcore, you know, as many X's as you can imagine, triple XXXXXX, porn in the form of photographs and videos and stuff. That was now available to kids. They could look at their friend's house. Maybe their friends weren't Christians. They could look at it on their cell phones when everything, remember when cell phones had the larger screen and they were like little movie or TV sets. And all of a sudden your kid, it used to be in the initial days of the internet, most parents like us, we put the internet and the computer in like a common room so that whoever in the family wanted to use the internet, they had to go through an accountability process which was simply that they were using the computer in a room where everybody could see what they were doing. So that really clamped down on anybody wanting to, visit an objectionable site or whatever. And it also removed the temptation to do that. Because no matter how Christian of a parent you are, no matter how much you try to enforce biblical values, you're not just at war with big tech. You're in a kind of a covert war with your kids' friends. And this is a big deal because whether you send your kid to a Christian school, as we did, all our kids went to Christian schools, or you send your kid to a private school, or whatever, not every family attempts to have a vigilance in monitoring what's appropriate or inappropriate on the internet. And in addition to that, but as all of you parents know, that a lot of your kids' friends, and you can't keep up with it, a lot of your kids' friends have parents that may work later into the evening. So there's no parental authority figure in their house. And that happens a lot. So what happens is the word gets around, and then kids, boys and girls, they get together at the house where both parents are working, and both parents won't be home until later in the night. So that gives them, 3 hours of access to the internet where they can look at anything and they don't have to be held accountable. So you're bending over backwards to have rules and accountability and restrictions, but all your kids have to do is go over to Susie or Johnny's house where the parents are working, or in many cases, if the parents are not Christians, there's no restrictions going on. There's no accountability, and kids find that out, and they find ways to look at the internet and all the objectionable stuff too, uncensored. So it's like next to an impossible battle to fight. No matter how you try to keep a standard, doesn't mean everybody else is, and the word gets around. So you and I, or many of us, were in that generation where that happened for the first time. It's still happening, and it's still getting more complicated. But you and I, many of us, probably a ton of you out there, were part of that generation where you had to fight that battle basically all by yourself. Because even if you knew other parents that agreed with your biblical values, there was just too many ways to get easy access to the internet. And so the net result is that your kids were probably the first generation in history in large numbers, millions and millions of kids, who at very, very, very young ages, I'm talking about younger than you can imagine, because kids have young brothers and sisters. And these young kids are watching quadruple X-rated, hardcore, God knows what, hardcore porn. And that, the neurological effect of that is so powerful, it like hits the brain with a bullet and causes an explosion of neurological chemicals. Because exposure to porn, especially to young kids and stuff, it's so neurologically powerful. It releases an entire cascade of powerful brain biochemicals like serotonin, like endogenous opiates, like acetylcholine, and many other biochemicals. The same biochemicals that explode in the heart, brain, and body when people fall in love, the same type of biochemicals that explode in the brain, heart, and body when you eat chocolate, and the same biochemicals that explode in the brain and body if you were, doing drugs like heroin or cocaine or meth or any of these other powerful drugs. All of these experiences, porn, hard drugs, and the whole spectrum of activities, they literally, being in love, eating chocolate, that when you analyze them biochemically, there are many similarities in these chemicals. They cause intense euphoria, ecstasy, and everything else. And that's why they're highly addictive. Okay, so most likely, many of you, like me, we were the first generation of parents in history that had to combat this. And it was very draining, because you thought you'd be doing a good job, and then you'd find out that one of your kids was going over to somebody's house, and you don't know exactly what they were doing, but you know that those parents didn't get home until later, or those parents didn't. There are many parents, like here in California, where I'm broadcasting from. The parents, there's a certain percentage of the parents that are militant. They're like porn activists for their children, because they believe in their philosophy, their humanistic philosophy, that kids have the right to be exposed to everything and is totally harmless. And you got to really be careful, because there's a lot of parents there that have that belief system, and that they consider it their private calling to kind of wage a spiritual war covertly against you and your kids, which means they facilitate on purpose and intentionally your kids' exposure to hardcore porn, etc., because they believe that that's their way of liberating your kids from some dogmatic, old-fashioned, repressive, Christian fundamentalist cult religion, and they're so self-righteous that they actually see themselves as they make sure your kid gets exposed to pornography. They see themselves as like psychological liberators, and you really got to watch out for that, because you're not just talking about a parent, you're talking about a parent that's on the warpath. So we had to deal with that. We had to face that. And many of you who are still parents and grandparents have to face that and deal with that now. Because I remember the critical turning point as a parent in this war against porn. And that was, first it was the laptop. The kid wasn't tied down to a family computer any longer, where there was accountability. The kid has a laptop. He can go anywhere he wants or she wants. And, you have unobstructed access to porn via laptops. And every parent knows what I'm talking about. But then they kept coming out with larger and larger cell phone screens. And that meant porn, hardcore porn, was available to kids anywhere because they could watch hardcore porns or pornographic pictures or whatever. They could watch that anywhere on the very large, high-resolution screens of their cell phone. And that means your kid could be walking down the street, walking to school. They could be anywhere, and they can have access to hardcore pornographic images. And the problem is, here's the problem. The problem is that repetitive exposure to pornography rewires the female and the male neurological system. And it creates artificial desires, artificial expectations, unrealistic desires, immature desires. And by that, what I mean is that porn has the effect of embedding into your child's consciousness a completely unrealistic view of human sexuality. So what that means is they have such a larger-than-life view of human sexuality, such a perfectionist standard of human sexuality, and it's such a fantasy-based programming of human sexuality that they are no longer satisfied with normal human sexuality. It has to be this idealized, enhanced, totally unrealistic, and otherwise they're disappointed. Well, guess what? In the real world, in real life, there's a big difference between real life and this artificial utopian presentation of sexuality. Because in real life, guess what? People get tired. In real life, they don't have a team of makeup artists, hairstylists, personal trainers to work the men and women out so their bodies are perfect. You see, porn presents an illusion-based form of sexuality where both the woman and the male and the set and setting is so artificially perfect because of things like makeup artists, lighting artists, designers, directors, editing, engineers. All blemishes are removed. All weight gain is concealed or hidden. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Let's not to pretend to be so super spiritual we don't know what's happening. We all know what's happening. So nobody, no male or female, can compete with this fantasy presentation. And see, the kids become addicted to this fantasy presentation of sexuality. And then what happens next? They're no longer interested in and no longer satisfied with what I would call normal human sexuality. And normal human sexuality, here's one of the most fundamental differences. Normal human sexuality deals with real human emotions. Real human desires for emotional and spiritual intimacy, not just this idealized physical playground. People get down, they get depressed, they want to share their lives with one another. Sexuality, true sexuality, is just one component in an entire spectrum of emotions and feelings that are all very valid and real. And it is a psychological aberration. It is a psychological delusion to separate people's real emotions, real identity, real feelings, real challenges, real humanity, a real desire for intimacy, a real desire to share your life with somebody, a real and genuine desire not to be cheated on, a real and genuine desire to have a faithful spouse. And you know, the porn industry makes fun and mocks everything that is godly, that adheres to traditional moral values, etc., etc. They mock it. They trample upon it. And guess what? Human beings were never designed by God to engage in let's call it Olympic style gymnastic sexual behavior. That's all artificial. Artificial in the sense that that's not what happens in the real world. We live in a world where people get tired, where people have headaches, where people need to let down. No husband or wife is going to be dressed perfectly, manicured perfectly, you know, walking around on display 24/7 in total perfection. So if that's what you're addicted to, that's what you're hooked to, you know, you're on the way to demise. Now, the problem is you have now programmed tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of young people in America and around the world. You've programmed them with an entire set of sexual beliefs that are totally unrealistic. And so when the day comes, and that's why so many of them are afraid to get married, when the day comes that if they do finally get married, they have in their memory banks all this programming of completely unrealistic fantasy expectations. And guess what? It doesn't work that way in the real life. And the next thing you know, they're fighting and there's divorce. And men, probably more than women, are more susceptible to this. They are susceptible to this total fantasy land. And that's not the way life is. So what is the causative agent in all of this is this constant promotion, this constant embedding, this constant publicity of a totally ultra fantasy, idealized sexual relationship that has nothing to do with reality. So we're at war with an illusion machine. And this illusion machine doesn't just encompass human sexuality. The illusion machine generated by the media, television, film, music, etc. The illusion machine embeds false images, false ideas of all kinds of things into the human mind, heart, soul, and spirit. So you will find that your mind, I'm not just talking about sexuality, I'm talking about attitudes about life. I'm talking about political viewpoints. I'm talking about ideologies. I'm talking about attitudes and perspectives about marriage. I'm talking about a worldview. You see, God created us in the real world to live an abundant life in the real world. God did not create us to try to imitate a fantasy world. This fantasy world, by the way, has another name. The fantasy world must be understood, first of all, primarily as a lie. Satan is the father of lies. That's why he packages and promotes a fantasy world. A fantasy world is a completely fictional, artificial world that is not real. It's a fantasy. So what Satan, the father of lies, does is he embeds all these ideas and programming about a fantasy world into millions of people. And then when they get a little bit older and they find out that, hey, guess what? This fantasy world is just that. It's a fantasy. It's not the real thing. They enter into all kinds of serious psychological conflicts, depression, anxiety, disillusionment, disappointment, because they bought a lie. Life is not some fantasy. And see, Lucifer, the Shining One, he's not called Lucifer the Shining One for nothing. One of Lucifer's most primary talents, one of Satan's most primary talents, is the ability to supernaturally generate an illusion, a fantasy, into the hearts and minds of people in order to deceive them. He does that on a spiritual level, an emotional level, a psychological level, a material level, and so on and so forth. That's why the scripture says, for the God of this world, Lucifer, has blinded the eyes of the unbelieving. Those people who do not believe that Jesus Christ is Lord, that's partially a result of Lucifer blinding their eyes, blinding the eyes of the unbelieving with all this false, dazzling Las Vegas illusion. So that he blinds them, so that they might not see the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. And the reason they can't see the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ is because they've been hypnotically blinded into believing this super idealistic world. And they can't handle the real world. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. We're going to expose this thing deeper in order to set free. You're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. And we will be back in just a moment. This is the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. Back to this term, predictive programming, which was first used in combination with science fiction novels, science fiction movies. And the idea in predictive programming is that you embed into the content of science fiction novels or science fiction movies, you embed into the content ideas about the future, ideas about future technologies, ideas about future sciences, ideas about what's going to happen to society and people in the future. So you introduce ideas that are very foreign to people, and these are ideas that people would not normally accept, except they give themselves permission to sit back and relax and accept what's being presented in a science fiction movie or a science fiction novel, because after all, they know it's just entertainment. Because it's entertainment, you're basically allowed to do, whatever you want. But in the process of introducing these technologies and sciences and things that are going to happen in the future, what you're really doing is you're exposing people, or you're exposing their subconscious minds. the mind beneath the surface. You're exposing their subconscious minds to all kinds of concepts, technologies, and sciences that their conscious mind doesn't believe it's possible for those things to exist right now. And their conscious mind is very doubtful that those things will even exist in the future. But you've cleverly lodged those science fiction concepts and ideas and technologies. You very carefully have lodged them in a person's subconscious mind. And in the subconscious mind, people don't have all those filters, and they just accept it as being real. The other thing about the subconscious mind is your subconscious mind can accept things as being real, while simultaneously your conscious mind rejects them, and your conscious mind does not accept them as real. The important thing to understand here is that when we're talking about predictive programming, we're entering the world of scientific mind control. Now, I've been finishing up my brand new book, Power from On High, which is going to deal with this science of predictive programming and many other things. I've also dealt with the science of predictive programming in many of my previous books, like Conquering the Matrix, A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1 and 2, and The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. Because I was so heavily into science fiction novels when I was a kid, because I was reading books on science heavily when I was a kid, because I wanted to be a scientist, I've always been interested in this. So, let me give you an example of predictive programming on a simple level. There was a movie that came out in, I believe it was 2002. It was called Minority Report with superstar Tom Cruise. It was directed by Steven Spielberg, and it was adapted from a famous science fiction novelist named Philip K. Dick. Now, the thing about Philip K. Dick is his name is not all that well known, but probably more of his science fiction novels have been produced into big budget science fiction films than just about any other writer. Because Philip K. Dick had this almost supernatural ability to see into the future and to see what the future would bring in terms of a science fiction type world and science fiction technologies. His ability to envision and see into future technologies was just phenomenal. So he wrote a ton of books, and a huge number of his books have been turned into the biggest blockbuster feature films ever made with the biggest directors. So, for example, a lot of people don't know this, but the movie Blade Runner, that was written by Philip K. Dick. But when Philip K. Dick wrote Blade Runner, he titled it How I Dream of Electric Sheep. I mean, it's a funky title, but it was really the title for Blade Runner before they decided to call it Blade Runner. And Philip K. Dick is the Blade Runner is based on his science fiction novel and many other science fiction novels. So in Minority Report, if you saw the movie, Tom Cruise is walking in this futuristic shopping mall, and there's all these gigantic flat-screen TVs in front of him. And as he's walking, he sees his picture in front of him on all these giant flat-screen TVs in the shopping mall. And what he sees besides his picture is he sees specific commercials, specific advertisements regarding cars and clothes and other things. Each screen has a movie with Tom's screen in it, and he's like in the commercial, and they're selling the product directly to him. Now, this isn't just a bunch of nonsense. Philip K. Dick had the ability to see in the future and to envision a time that through Wi-Fi, through computer technology, it would be easy, for example, for that to be a reality. People would drive down the street, they'd see an electronic billboard with their own picture, and certain products, commercial products, would be pitched towards them. Or he envisioned a future where computers would play a specific ad, for example, for the character Tom Cruise is playing in Minority Report. Now, that's no longer far-fetched. That movie was made a long time ago, 2002, as I said. Since that time, your internet, your computers, your cell phone, your laptop, it's already sending you ads, commercials, solicitations that are designed just for you and your interests. And you say, well, how do they know what I want, what my interests are, what kind of products appeal to me? Because the big tech companies are constantly searching your search records. They're constantly searching your internet history. They're constantly searching all your activity on the internet, and they have compiled and continue to compile a complete dossier or file system of what you like and don't like based on what you do on the internet. So when you go on the laptop, the reason you're getting certain pop-up ads or products or services are popping up, or certain products or services are popping up on your social media or whatever, it's because the big tech company has sold all your information, all your searching information. They have sold it to companies, and those companies are now coming on your social media, your Facebook or whatever, and they're playing ads designed and products designed specifically for you. So Philip K. Dick already foresaw that. Now, in many places, you can walk, and while you're walking, you will see ads come up on giant flat screen TVs that either have you in them or they have specific products and services that they know you're interested in. So the futuristic world portrayed in Minority Report is happening already. It's happening already. Another thing the movie Minority Report dealt with, and Philip K. Dick was able to see into the future, and that also has to do with more along the lines of predictive programming, except this is called predictive policing. So in predictive policing, you have giant supercomputers keeping a file on everybody, and the giant supercomputers using AI or artificial intelligence know everything about every person. They know your habits, what you dream about, what you like, what you dislike. They know your psychological profile. They know if you're crazy or not. They know if you control your temper or not, or what you're addicted to, and on and on and on. They have compiled an exhaustive psychological profile with the help of artificial intelligence on just about everybody. They know your criminal history if you've had one. And so in the movie Minority Report, this technology is fully operative. Okay? So what they do is they have everybody in the future in Minority Report is plugged into what they call a group mind, where all thoughts can be analyzed. Sound familiar to our time? And in the science fiction world of Minority Report, the government, the police, they used advanced AI computer technology to arrest people before they commit a crime, based on a computer analysis of their thoughts, emotions, and behavior. And in the future, Minority Report portrays a society where all people are plugged into a group mind and where all thoughts can be analyzed. Now, there's more in the movie Minority Report. But remember, Minority Report, the entire movie, is an example of predictive programming. It is showing you, it is exposing to you things you probably wouldn't normally believe could ever happen. They're showing you all kinds of technologies that your conscious mind most likely doesn't believe could ever happen. And they're embedding it in your subconscious. Now, in Minority Report, they also interweave genetic modification and a supernatural element in the movie. So, the police, the government, using artificial intelligence and computers, which can predict the future, this society, this futuristic society, has already genetically modified mutants. We're already in that future. We're genetically modifying people, and genetically modified people are mutants. But these mutants that they genetically modify in Minority Report are also called precogs. And these precogs have precognitive abilities, which allow them to see up to 2 weeks into the future. So, in this science fiction film, the precogs are merged into AI machines which predict the future. Now, this movie was made in 2002. And as far back as 2002, governments, police agencies, etc., were already secretly beginning to use predictive programming. And the actual movie Minority Report is a vehicle, is a mechanism for predictive programming, in that it is subconsciously preparing you, subconsciously preparing me, and subconsciously preparing the masses to accept a society which uses what they call predictive crime fighting. Now, there's this maniacal, evil guy, in my opinion, named Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the World Economic Forum, WEF. He's the guy that coined the expression, the global reset. And his futuristic society, which is very powerful, it's connected with the United Nations and the richest billionaires and trillionaires on planet Earth. And so his World Economic Forum brought up the use of what they call police analytics, which is the use of predictive policing in arresting people before they commit a crime. This is like psychotic. They are arresting people before they commit a crime based on artificial intelligence data. This predictive policing technology, I want you to listen up here. This movie, Minority Report, was made in 2002. Since this time, this predictive policing technology is currently in use in approximately 63 cities in Europe and the United States of America. That means major cities all over the US and all over Europe are already arresting people before they commit an actual crime. Did you know you could be arrested before you commit an actual crime? If they're artificial intelligence computers, if they're police predictive technology, and if their technology using predictive policing determines via the computer and artificial intelligence, the computer believes hypothetically that you're going to commit such and such a crime in the future, they now can arrest you for a crime that you have not yet committed. They can now arrest you for a crime that they predict you're going to commit. Now, look, any way you slice this, you talk about the Bill of Rights, you talk about the Constitution, you talk about our founding fathers, you talk about all the freedoms our government has guaranteed us, Pilgrims and the Puritans, etc., etc. They would have been outraged beyond belief to think that America has now become a kind of futuristic totalitarian regime where they think they can legally arrest you before you commit a crime. That is a complete violation of your Constitution and your Bill of Rights. In fact, it's the rape and brutal assault of your constitutional rights and Bill of Rights. So you have all these major cities in America and Europe arresting people not for crimes that they actually committed, but they're being arrested based on whether or not a computer predicts that you're going to commit a crime in the future. That is terrifying. And the potential for totalitarianism and abuse, and just think about the potential in terms of a scientific elite and people secretly rigging the computers, secretly rigging the artificial intelligence computers, secretly rigging the computers that are making the predictions on specific people and then arresting them for crimes they have not committed yet, all based on the analysis of the rigging of a computer. That is horrifying. That's a Frankenstein totalitarian government. So you see, the average person in America and Europe is completely unaware of the fact that we are being bombarded with by hundreds of thousands of subliminal messages on television, music, books, movies, video, social media, video games, cell phones, laptops, and other technologies. I open all of this up big time in my book that you can pre-order now, and you should, Power from On High. In fact, I'm reading to you from some notes that I'm going to expand upon in Power from On High. So the synergistic effect or combined effect of all this input media, the way it plays out psychologically, is that when they bombard you repetitively, repetition is a key psychological dynamic in brainwashing. I talk about it in Conquering the Matrix. Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1 and 2, The Greatest Battle for the Future in the Hearts and Minds of Mankind, and my new book that you can pre-order now, Power from On High. When you repetitively, when you repeat over and over again certain symbols, certain words, certain phrases, certain actions, certain behaviors, certain ideas, certain ideologies, certain worldviews, when you repeat those over and over again, even on a subliminal message via television, music, books, movies, video, social media, video games, cell phones, laptops, and other technologies, what happens to the human brain is this. There is a synergistic or combined effect. There's a force multiplier effect of all this subliminal input. And it's extremely subtle. It happens without people realizing it. But what you're doing, what the scientific dictatorship is doing, is they're subtly indoctrinating you through a repetition of ideas, beliefs, worldviews, morality, politics, economics, and ideologies, and myriad programming that is designed to program you below the surface of your conscious mind and program you in the area of your subconscious mind. And when you're being programmed in the area of your subconscious mind, along with technology, what that is really is hypnosis. You are being technologically and hypnotically programmed. Because in hypnosis, your conscious mind doesn't know that your subconscious mind has been programmed through hypnosis. So predictive programming is used in all kinds of television shows and movies for the specific purpose of inserting or embedding subliminal messages into the human collective consciousness. Now, what do I mean by that? Again, I explain this and I open this up in a powerful way in Power from On High. I open it up in a powerful way. Now, the thing that you have to realize is that the theory of things like the human collective consciousness, this all goes back about 100 years. And there was a famous German psychologist named Carl Jung who developed the theory of human consciousness. And in his theory, he believed that each person had a psyche or a personality that had three parts: the ego, personal unconsciousness, and a collective unconscious. The personal unconsciousness or personal subconscious is that part of a person's mind or consciousness that is below the surface of your rational, conscious, and awake mind. So you have a personal unconsciousness in two parts. You have a personal unconsciousness that basically deals with you, your personality, and your personal subconscious. Okay? But it operates below the surface of your conscious mind. It comes out, for example, in the imagery and content of the dreams in your REM sleep. But then you have another part of your unconscious mind, and that is the collective unconscious that is part of a person's subconscious mind. And the collective unconscious is that subconscious part of your mind which is connected to a group brain or group mind. Now, why that's important is that not only do you have a subconscious, but you have a subconscious that connects with your inner self, but you have a subconscious that also connects with a group mind, which means all of the minds of the millions of people on planet Earth have a subconscious, and that subconscious somehow is networked together in one way or another. And because we are connected, we're connected to one another on some level that scientists don't fully understand. This is not New Age. We're not embracing a New Age philosophy. We're only taking this as far as it is scientifically a probability, and then we're putting the brakes on it. So, Jung understood this, but more importantly, we live in a world right now that is ruled and controlled by a highly advanced scientific elite or globalist elite, which is highly sophisticated in using science and technology to embed predictive programming in us individually and to embed predictive programming in what is called the group mind. So this scientific dictatorship, which is very real, or the technocratic elite, which is also very real, uses subtle forms of psychological conditioning through the media to create acceptance in the public with planned societal changes that will be coming. Now, if you think about the hundreds of television programs, films, music, and other media that every one of us is exposed to on a regular basis, when you begin to subtly introduce repetitive ideas, repetitive belief systems, and worldviews through things like books, movies, video games, and television, that gives the scientific elite the opportunity to embed secular humanist, occult ideas, non-biblical sexuality, and ideology as seeds of unbelief in the individual unconsciousness and the collective unconsciousness. Now, that may have been a little complex. I apologize, but this is very important. Let me simplify this for you. All you have to do is notice and all you have to do is just spend some time looking back at episodic TV shows, comedy TV shows, other TV shows, and popular films. Just begin looking back in time periods of like 10 years ago, and then 20 years ago, and 30 years ago. So that means you're looking at movies, television, etc., in intervals of 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. So there's like 10 years between each area. You look at the movies and television and music that is playing out over this 10-year and then a 20-year and 30-year period, it becomes very obvious to you. You notice major spiritual, attitudinal, and cultural changes. Okay? It's quite shocking. And if you really pay close attention, you can see changes in the culture, in the spirituality, in the attitudes, in the sexuality, in the morals. You can really see changes in just 2 or 3 years. But the very noticeable changes are going to be in periods of like 10, 20, and 30 years. Well, what you're looking at from a larger perspective is how this constant exposure to repetitive media and to repetitive subconscious messages has actually transformed our nation in incremental decades. There has been a massive, all-pervasive, and major transformation on all kinds of levels. Now, you know what I'm talking about. The way people behave in dating and relationships, and what is shown and what is not shown in terms of sexuality, modesty or immodesty in terms of attire or dress, vulgarity or politeness in conversations on TV and film, how explicit the content is in conversations in film and television and stuff like that. You can see it change right in front of your eyes, and what you see as you look at what has happened in the past 10, 20, and 30 years is you see, if you're discerning, you see glaring, shocking changes, especially in areas of what is considered acceptable or not acceptable in terms of sexual behavior. I mean, I'm not asking you to like immerse yourself in a study of sexual behavior. I'm talking about so-called mainstream prime time television shows. What's happened in the last 10 years and in the last 20 years and 30 years. And what you see all across the board is a pervasive degradation, a pervasive downward pull. Okay? Where you know, if you were alive 30 years ago or more, if you were just alive 30 years ago or more, you can remember what life, culture, beliefs, and morals used to be like. And you can remember they were totally different than they are today. Now, if you were alive 40 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 60 years ago, or 70 years ago, the changes are even more revolutionary, are even more disturbing. You're looking with your own eyes at the total degradation, the total destruction, and the total obliteration of all that was good in American culture. And it doesn't take, a rocket scientist to figure out that this did not happen by accident. This was an intentional, strategic attack on American culture, American values, American ideologies, American politics, American spirituality, American sexuality. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that people that were very powerful methodically and scientifically went out of their way to detonate and destroy our culture, because you can see it happen over the span of time in the media. And it's very sad to see it, because what you're seeing is the planned social disintegration, degradation, and strategic destruction of the human personality, society, the family, and the nation. Now, if we were going to tie this all together and say, why did it happen? There's no, in my opinion, after 40 years of research, after writing 35 books, and again, knowledge is power. You need to read my newest book, pre-order it now. Power from on high. What has happened is Judeo Christian American culture has been targeted for destruction by an occult and scientific elite. Now, if that's too hard for you or your friends to wrap your head around, I can understand that. But if you're going to survive, if we're going to survive, you're going to have to get over the denial syndrome. Because that's what it is. When you say, well, that can't be, what you're doing is you're denying the facts. That's the denial syndrome. What I'm telling you, and you know in your heart that what I'm telling you is the truth. You know it, just like I know it. And what has happened is that there has been the heavily planned and financed incremental degradation and transformation of our nation. And on top of that, all of this has been done by design. Why would that be? Well, to see, why would that be? Then you have to step up to a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of knowledge, a higher level of understanding, which you can do if you're willing to acquire knowledge, because knowledge is power. Let's remember once again, because they talk about it in all the books I just mentioned to you, the operating motto of the powerful occult forces that rule our nation from behind the scenes. Their motto is called order out of chaos, or manufactured crisis. The game plan is that in order to bring about a new world order, you must destroy the old order. That's what's happening. And how you destroy the old order is through chaos or manufactured crisis. Okay, what's their goal? Their goal of the globalist and scientific elite that have an occult worldview, because it's anti-Christian, their goal is to initiate what they call the global reset. And the global reset is just a new term for the New World Order. So if you want to know why you live in all this chaos and why all these weird things seem to be happening with increasing frequency, the answer is no, you're not crazy. No, you're not crazy. You're sane. The people who deny reality, the people who deny what's happening right in front of their eyes, they're crazy. They can call you all the names they want, like you're a conspiracy theorist or whatever. But all that is a bunch of blah, 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 blah. The proof of the pudding is, you need to take courage in this. The proof of the pudding is, you are using your mind. You are thinking. You are stepping up to the plate. And that disturbs them because they have swallowed the Kool-Aid. Like in a cult, they have swallowed the Kool-Aid. You haven't swallowed the Kool-Aid. You've chosen to use your brain. You've chosen to use your critical thinking process. And that's why you can see the degradation. You can see the chaos. You can see the manufactured crisis. And you can see, you know, you're not stupid. You have an intuitive and intellectual sense. You can see that they're trying to pull the big fast one on us, which is a global reset. And what's a global reset? It's the total resetting of our society from a Judeo-Christian, biblical, patriotic, American dream society, capitalist society, It's the total resetting of that into a Marxist communist, no constitution, no Bill of Rights, but a global reset where you live under an all-powerful totalitarian regime, like the pyramid structure with the all-seeing eye of Lucifer at the top of the pyramid. That's where this is going. And what they've been able to do, this goes back to the Beatles, and I get into this in my book in a heavy way. Pre-order it now. Power from on high. I get into all this stuff. The Beatles were a cultural, psychological invasion of America. America was unprepared. America was disarmed because these four boys in their suits and jackets, looking very harmless, and their little mop-top haircuts, which at that time, was pretty harmless. They looked neat and clean, and their haircuts were relatively short, and their lyrics to their songs were stuff like, I want to love you, yeah, 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 and very simple, basically clean songs. But the Beatles were a Trojan horse sent into America by an occult globalist elite to bring down and destroy our patriotic American and Christian-based youth culture. And everybody's defenses were down because the Beatles came off so clean cut, so safe. But they were a Trojan horse on purpose. They were put together by highly intelligent scientists and mind control institutes. I explain all of this in my book, Power from on High. Mind control institutes put together their lyrics, their songs, their production, their marketing, and they were a Trojan horse to America. So America let its guard down to these relatively safe Beatles. But these relatively safe Beatles, in a very, very short period of time, in just a couple of years, all of a sudden their hair is down to their waist. All of a sudden they're talking about smoking pot, having sex in the road. All of a sudden they're talking about taking LSD. All of a sudden they're talking about chanting and meditating with their gurus. So they come off as this clean-cut, short-haired, wearing suits, very safe, singing group. That was the Trojan horse. They came through the gates of America, Trojan horse. But within 3 years or less, this same safe, cute, tame, harmless group became the deliverer and communicator and promoter of powerful LSD drugs, marijuana, free sex, sex out in the middle of the road, taking LSD, meditating and chanting with Eastern mystical gurus, and that was an attack on every facet of American patriotic Christian culture. And then, because the Beatles were so squeaky clean, they kicked the doors down for all the other groups that were much more hardcore, like the Rolling Stones, like Led Zeppelin and the others, where it was in your face, hardcore sexuality, Satanism, drugs, heroin, cocaine, LSD. I mean, it was 100 times more immoral. And they brought down American culture on purpose. It was a targeted psyops, a psychological warfare attack. You don't believe me? I document it, and I put it all together in my book, Power from on High. And it gets heavier than that. Okay, so where we are now is this machine, this brain machine, is still moving. It's still trying to use repetition, and embed its series of messages into our subconscious minds. But now they keep turning up the heat. Now, instead of just flirting with communist ideas like the Beatles did, I mean, remember, it was John Lennon, one of those cute Beatles. And I talk about this too in my book, Powerful High. It was John Lennon, one of those cute Beatles, who sang that famous song, Imagine. Imagine there's no heaven, no money, no nations. That was like an anthem to a communist, Marxist, one world government, antichrist government. I mean, it was the anthem of the New World Order. It was the most evil, poisonous song you could have sung. And it's sung every day all around the world from Times Square. It's sung over and over again. But it is an anthem to atheism, the occult, Satanism, and the biblically warned one world government, one world religion, and one world economic system. So, let's trace the path of the Beatles. They start off so harmless and cute. Short hair, mop tops, sing cute little songs about holding a girl's hand. Within 3 years, man, they've turned up the heat, and they're promoting LSD. They're promoting Eastern mystical gurus. They're promoting having sex openly in the road. They're promoting, all kinds of evil, all kinds of sin and immorality. And then they highlight it with John Lennon's song, which is basically bowing down to this New World Order of the Antichrist government. Talk about a poison pill. That's exactly what the Beatles were. They were a poison pill. But you see, the people behind that intentionally did that. And it didn't stop with John Lennon. That was a long time ago. Why do you think these groups like Beyonce, Rihanna, Jay-Z, and on and on and on, why do you think they're bombarding youth with equally poisonous messages, but taking it to the next level? Why all the songs and symbols on Satanism, on satanic lifestyles? Why all the emphasis on sexual perversion and S&M performed live on stage? Why, the emphasis on hard drugs like meth and stuff? Because they're continuing the work the Beatles started. They want to demolish our society so they can have their communist, atheist, occultist, antichrist religion. So, we have a choice. We can sit here in a stupor, like most Christians do, or we can say enough is enough, but we have to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. You don't fight this kind of thing by doing stupid things like people did in my generation. Don't win the battle against this by burning Beatles albums or by burning, Jay-Z's albums. That's a losing mentality. You got to have knowledge. Knowledge is power. If you're going to combat very powerful spiritual forces, you have to use superior wisdom, superior spiritual power. If you're going to go down to this stupidity on steroids and burn Beatles albums, if that's your methodology for dealing with a cultural spiritual war, you ought to stay home and do us all a favor. Because you have not paid the price to acquire knowledge. Knowledge is power. You don't have any knowledge. You have no power. Stay home. I'm serious. Stay home. You're going to do more harm than good. We have to understand that what the Apostle Paul said is true. For our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the the dark, unseen forces of wickedness in heavenly places. So Paul is telling us that we're not fighting people. We're not fighting flesh and blood. What we're really fighting is demonic powers and fallen angels that are energizing all these forces behind the scenes. So that means we need to learn how to wage spiritual warfare in the invisible realm or the spiritual world or heavenly places. We need to become effective spiritual warriors and use the weapons of our warfare that are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. God has given us a window of opportunity to do this right now. That is the purpose of this program, the Paul McGUIRE Report, which is heard all over the world. We have to raise the level of awareness, raise the level of a biblical education and a biblical worldview among the body of Christ in America and all around the world. And we need to do it now because time is running out. So I'm asking you to join me in this spiritual warfare. I'm asking you to become, and I'm thanking all of you who are spiritual warriors for this ministry, for me and my family. I thank you for spreading our message far and wide and helping us do end run around internet censorship. And I thank you for seeking the Lord. And as the Lord directs you, making your financial and donations and contributions to this ministry. Together, in unity, we can change the direction of the nation you're in. We can change the direction of this nation. We don't have to lay down and roll over and die. That's not the plan of God for us. We've been given the supernatural power of the Holy Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, the mind of Christ, and the Word of God. And as we learn to wield the sword of the Spirit effectively and strategically, which is the Word of God, then we can become victorious. So I want to thank you for listening. Spread this message far and wide. This is Paul McGUIRE. Remember to visit paulmcguire.us now. That's paulmcguire.us. God bless you. This is Paul McGUIRE.